So I wanted to thank everybody for braving the streets of New York today. I know between Advertising Week, 100,000 people, and the UN in town, it was not easy to get here, but you did a great job. And I'm going to get out of the way and introduce this amazing panel. We've got Meg Graham, who is the advertising reporter for CNBC. Some of you may know her from her work at Ad Age, and prior to that, at other publications. She is from Chicago, and I'm going to let her introduce the rest of the panel, and we'll get going.
Thanks, Lana. Thank you guys all for coming. I know this is a crazy day, and it's amazing to see so many people so far away in that traffic from the venue, so super excited for this. Like Lana said, I cover marketing and advertising at CNBC.
Are you familiar with how these work?
I'm not great with technology, actually. And so I've been over there for about 5 months and kind of learning the ins and outs of some of this space more broadly. I covered agencies before, so I don't want to take up any more time on me. I want to let the panelists introduce themselves, and then we're going to have a great conversation about some of the big issues going on that you're probably hearing about this week. So things around data, things around regulation, and most of all, the things that you guys are kind of finding the biggest challenges and the things that you're most worried and interested in talking about. So let's kick it off down there.
Yeah, sure. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name's Jonathan Lacoste. I'm the co-founder and president of a company called Jebbit. We're a declared data company, and we're going to be talking a lot about data transparency, how different companies are collecting and using data, and really excited for the awesome panel we have this evening. So thanks for coming.
Hello. I'm Belinda Smith. I'm Belinda Smith. I work at EA. I'm the head of marketing intelligence, and up until April was the head of global media for EA. Thank you, Lou.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Lou Pascalis. I'm with Bank of America. I run several departments there, but let's just keep it to media buying and comm strategy for now.
Martin Sorrell, Executive Chairman, popular title at the moment, of S4 Capital.
Ben Feldman, Strategy and Innovation at NYIAX.
Great.
So the first time I've been on a panel where the panelists were asked to introduce themselves. That's your job.
And we're off.
Well, you also don't need an introduction.
Maybe you didn't know who we were. I don't know.
So,
I couldn't resist that.
Cocktail?
Get your own back on CNBC.
oh man.
Do you want me to get your glass?
Yeah, I'm good. So let's start broad here. I think I want to focus this conversation on the areas that you're most interested in. So let's start with the biggest challenges that you're thinking about. Lou, you go.
Sure.
Turn it off.
Yeah, we need a new mic up here. So I think biggest challenges, I think the industry is facing an absolute crisis of trust, and it's a three-way problem between consumers and platforms, between clients and platforms, and I think also between agencies and platforms. And I think it's a crisis of our own making, and I'm worried that there's insufficient sort of centralized leadership or even acknowledgement of the problem, but I think it's going to be a particular headwind in digital. At the same time, there's incredible growth in things like streaming. You've got Disney Plus, you've got Peacock, you've got HBO Max Go. We're now at a point at B of A where we're only 60% of our television investment is in linear, and that's just going to go down, down, down. That's going to be data-driven, so that's more opportunities for personalization. And similarly, the audio revolution that's taking place with podcasts and the age of assistance, as Google likes to call it, all of which are going to theoretically allow us to learn one-to-one what's on consumers' mind and better tailor our messaging. But if we don't solve the crisis of trust, none of that's going to matter, and we're going to be back to 1990s advertising where it's reach and frequency and scale, which is great because I used to go home at 3 o'clock in those days, and fine, but it's going to be kind of boring.
Well said. I am probably going to agree with most of the answers given on this panel. So to not steal anyone's answer and not be repetitive, I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn on this one. I actually think, from my perspective, so sat at a brand, the crisis we're facing is courage and talent.
I am increasingly frustrated by people who wear the title of marketer and think that everything is knowable and that data will tell them all of the knowable things and that they cannot make decisions without said data and without knowing before they make the decision what the right thing to do is. We talk about it as creativity a lot, but then I think that gets conflated with like format and what the content of the ad looks like. I'm really concerned about just the lack of longstanding marketing expertise in the industry and people being able to rely on that to make decisions without robots and computers.
Yeah, I think we have an interesting convergence around personalization in the sense of it's something that we've been on a march as an industry towards for 5 to 10 years, but when you kind of go behind the closed doors and you talk about what's actually happening and what data we have available and how we're leveraging it, we still have a ways to go. We're still in the first couple of innings. So from a challenge standpoint, I certainly spend a lot of time thinking and talking about that. But I also think that, and there's a Fortune 500 company who has their digital transformation summit right now. It's a 3-day event, and the theme this year is earning trust and consistent attention. And I think whether it's on internally having courage to act, whether it's externally the trust paradox that you were talking about, Lou, I think there is a crisis in trust, and we need more transparency. And so that's certainly something that I think a lot of us are faced with and are thinking about in our day-to-day jobs.
So Martin.
What a gloomy bunch. A year ago, I probably would have been as gloomy. Not now. So there are no challenges, only opportunities. So we're totally focused, and we have Pete Kim here from Mighty Hive and Wes Taha from MediaMonks. So it's our programmatic and content pillars, if I can call you a pillar. Not pillock, pillar. People don't know what a pillock is, so go to Google. So we're focused on purely digital, which is growing at 20% a year. By the way, if digital is growing at 20%, and the industry, the 500 billion in media, is growing at 3 or 4%, what does that mean about the other half that's traditional? If you do the maths, it means there must be Lou touched on it, a pretty steep decline in traditional media, which nobody sort of likes to talk about. The holding companies, interestingly, are increasingly bundling their traditional and digital activities into one so that analysts and you and I can't find out what's happening, what the compression is in their traditional advertising and media businesses, which is sort of interesting. So we're purely digital. We're focused on what we call the holy trinity of first-party data fueling digital advertising, content, and programmatic in a continuous loop. So the old tentpole model won't go away completely, but is under pressure too. So the ability to continually reiterate that loop of data, defining content, defining programmatic, getting more data, defining content again, it's rather like an election campaign without an election date. That's critically important. Faster, better, cheaper is a big opportunity too. Faster means being more agile, or being agile, which a lot of the traditional legacy businesses in our industry just are not. The 6 holding companies getting the greatest attention. Better means a better understanding of technology. The fearsome 5 or the 7 sisters or the 10 companies that we focus on, which are the fearsome 5 Google, Facebook, Amazon, Tencent, Alibaba, Apple, Microsoft, and then the 3 software companies, Adobe, Oracle, and Salesforce. Maybe you throw in SAP and IBM and ByteDance and Baidu, make 14, but that's the ecosystem which we operate in. So really understanding them is the better bit. And cheaper, that's never going to go away. Although the 3G model or zero-based budgeting has been under pressure, or is under severe pressure at the moment, particularly after Kraft Heinz. Kraft Heinz, when it bid for Unilever, was 105 billion market cap. Today it's something like 35, last time I checked. So ZBB is discredited today to a certain degree. And somebody mentioned this question about clients are trying to take back control. There's an eerie resemblance to Brexit. And the UK votes are trying to take back, you're laughing, but I think it's true, to take back control from Brussels Marketers having cut their costs because of zero-based budgeting. And then the platforms, the walled gardens having gone up, have suddenly said we've got to have much more control. So that's faster, better, cheaper. And then the final thing, which is an opportunity, is a unitary structure. So we banned earnouts. They may be a good way of buying service businesses for 4 or 5 years. But we're not interested in people selling their businesses to us. What we want is them to buy into the vision that I outlined, purely digital, the Holy Trinity model, and then finally the faster, better, cheaper tagline, which sounds, by the way, glib, but it really resonates. If you, just finally, the big opportunity is if you said to me, if we asked a CMO or a CEO, what is the biggest problem? What keeps them awake at night? Or when they wake up in the morning, what do they worry about? The single most frequent response, if not total response, unitary response, is agility. They are totally frustrated. Legacy businesses are totally frustrated by the inability of their businesses to move in terms of digital transformation. So no crises. Lack of trust is an opportunity for us. Lack of transparency is an opportunity for us. The only thing that will be a threat is if we don't take advantage of the opportunity. That will then become a threat.
Okay, we'll get into transparency in a sec, but.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to echo everybody on the panel, but from NYIAX's perspective, it's what everybody's complaining about or seeing as opportunities is something we're taking advantage of. The issues of transparency, the issues of platforms and relationships between the key parties, whether it's the key counterparties of publishers and agencies or brands, whether it's consumers and publishers, or consumers and the agencies or brands specifically. And to the faster, better, cheaper model, it's what we're trying to do by creating a standardized methodology for the constituents to communicate with one another in a standardized way. We can do it in a more effective and streamlined manner. Everybody can save their time by also doing a contract up front and having everybody understand what the expectations are and the methodologies about delivery and reconciliation and payments down the road. Everybody knows what's going to happen, and you can expedite that entire process and save money, save time, and make everything work. It's to your point, right? It's just finding where the advantages need to be had and taking advantage of them.
When we talk about the transparency bit, and I think Lou and Belinda, perhaps you can weigh in on this, like, what are you really looking for? Transparency is talked about ad nauseum, and especially this week, you're hearing about it nonstop, but what do you really, really want when you're talking about transparency with your partners in your supply chain?
You brought it up.
So I don't think it's what Bob Leodos is talking about in the ANA. I think that there was a moment of a transparency issue between agencies and clients, and I think we all took major steps to.
Why do you think that Bob Leodos pursued that course? What do you think? When I was at WPP, we spent a lot of time scratching our heads. Why did he pursue it with such messianic zeal?
Not going there. I'll talk to you.
Come on.
What I will say,
Lou.
no, but what I will say is it caused us to focus on it. We addressed it, and it's in the freaking past. If you haven't changed your contract with your agency, if you haven't had the right conversations, then shame on you. Okay. The transparency issue right now is what data is being consumed by the machine learning and the propensity model that the platforms are using to assign media inventory to you. Are they using protected class data, which cannot be in the algorithm? Are they completely clear with you about how they're doing the scoring? Do you understand that the audience that you dream about in the conference room, the proxies that the agency try to buy against, and the propensity scoring that is a complete black box on every large platform is taking you into a place where you don't know who you're talking to, and then add the walled garden piece on top of 60% of the inventory, and you're really not orchestrating conversations. I think you've heard me say before, a number of you, that we've reached the end of the advertising era. The advertising era was all about marketers providing a stimulus and consumers dutifully responding. We are now in the era of intent-based marketing. And to win the war for attention, you have to understand intention. That is a deterministic signal. That is a deterministic signal that is easily found. Peter, you and I have talked about this, okay? But we've got 3 problems. 1, it's getting obfuscated. 2, we don't know who we're really talking to anyhow. And 3, we haven't built a data science yet to interpret 9 or 10 signals and understand mindset, motivation, et cetera, at a very deep level. We're doing what I call mousetrap marketing, which we were doing for 15 years. Somebody clicks on a shoe ad, and they get followed by shoe ads for like the next 3 weeks because they're a shoe intender. People are more complicated than that.
Yeah,
We're
but
more
you left out one very important thing that happened post-2008, the financial crisis, was that clients started to squeeze the agencies.
Yes, that's fair.
What happened was, post-2008, the big surprise was 9 was a recovery year. Or 10 was a recovery year.
Yeah.
But then after that, worldwide GDP was less than pre-Lehman, pre-2008. Why? Because there was less inflation. So nominal GDP was less. Inflation was less. There was less pricing power, and therefore there was a focus on cost. And when people talk about, why are the 6 holding companies by and large in trouble, and their top line growing, on average, let's say 2% or 1% or whatever it is, the primary reason is because of the pressure that was exerted. They were the meat and the sandwich. They were the meat between the media owners and the clients, and they could exert the pressure. The clients could not exert the pressure on Murdoch or Iger or CBS or Viacom or whatever it happened to be, but they could exert the pressure on the agencies. And the traditional advertising business has become a zero-sum game. Some of the agency, if you're an investor, you probably should short the stocks of the agencies that win major traditional assignments.
Wait.
Why?
Wait,
no, wait a minute.
There's a big shareholder up here.
No, let me get this. Why? Because the agencies give guarantees on media price inflation, as you well know. They give guarantees on media pricing that they cannot fulfill. And so the agency business has been commoditized, and that's a real problem.
So can I don't want to dominate, but I have to respond to this because Martin, I cannot believe after 25 years I'm going to say these words. I don't think it's that simple.
I think it is.
I think that it's a much bigger problem. We have lost the plot on how we define the return on investment in advertising. We are moving from a transaction model to a relationship model. The KPIs are still, and the negotiation is still based on transactional things like awareness and reach and frequency, and did this ad sell stuff, when in fact we should be in a CRM-based model. And we should be looking at a customer long-term value. And you see, this is a fundamental problem of attribution. We are not attributing to marketing the value it delivers, and we are conflating advertising with marketing in such a way that we jeopardize the global economy.
And with all due respect, I think you're over-intellectualizing it. When you look...
Can someone tweet that? Because that's a...
when you look
hot kettle.
When you look at the...
I tell Lou this all the time. I've said that to him so many times.
When you look at the factors that have influenced the agencies, I'm looking from the point of view of the agencies, right? One of them is what I think I described. The other, people go to Google, Facebook, putting pressure, going direct, etc. Having 1 year over the top or on the other side. 1 year out, I don't think Google and Facebook want to do that. I don't think they want to, assume the service layer. I think they want to have direct relationships with the clients, which is fine. But the agencies get paranoid about anybody talking to their clients, including us. And so that's another. And then there's the consultancies, Deloitte, Accenture, whatever, BCG, etc., building their digital practices. I think those are the things. The thing you're talking about is something that applies to the whole industry. It's not the agency issue. I think the traditional agency business has become a very difficult place to be. It's a legacy business, which is very difficult to turn. Bank of America is a legacy business in the financial sector, and you have to grapple with the problems, and Bank of America has responded to those problems, just like other banks have as well. It's probably easier for them to do it, or they have fashioned the way of doing it much more effectively. But the traditional holding companies are in really deep trouble. My own view on the traditional holding companies is they'll be broken up. You started to see the process happen at WPP with Cantal. And I think you will see the pressures intensify, particularly if we get a squeeze after the US election in 2020. which may make you may have a view on that. CNBC.
So, just to interject here.
Are you still dribbling?
Yeah. I haven't finished my drink quite yet. My view on this is, yes, agree with what's been said, and while we've been talking about it, brands are dying. There are a lot of nuanced, important issues. You should definitely look at your contracts 4 years ago. You should definitely ask questions. I find it very concerning to give a budget to an algorithm and not be able to explain to anyone you work with how it works or what it's doing or who it's serving to. So I would just say yes, and on top of that, growth is not happening the way that it used to. And that's a discussion that I don't think we're having enough of. What I really, I've worked agency side, and what I really appreciate about that is the role that the agency plays as a consultative partner, as a, strategic pioneer for your business, giving the breadth and depth of accounts that they see. And I'm really eager for us to shift this conversation to include more of what it used to include, which is traditional branding, which is growth, which is measurement past, in-quarter EPS. Yes, all of those things are important and have a place, but my personal view is that we've focused on that to the detriment of everything else. And when I said earlier that I'm concerned about talent, I worry if we have people coming into this business that even know how to do the other thing anymore.
So I think that's something I'm hearing a lot of, the balance of brand and, these other things. I think we'll get back to that. I want to talk a little bit about data right now, and we're all sort of seeing this shift in this conversation around what's going on with third-party data and what's kind of coming next and what each of you are doing to kind of brace for that. Do you want to start, Jonathan? I think you guys are doing some stuff around declared data.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me what that is.
Yeah, so I'll define declared data real quick, and then I think we can take a half step back because there's a million ways we could have this data conversation. So in the realm of possible consumer data that companies have at their fingertips, there's third-party, second-party, and first-party data. Within first-party data, largely, it's either inferred data. You are watching what someone clicks on your website. You're watching what someone clicks or engages with in the content that you are promoting or that you create, or you're watching what someone purchases, transactional data. Then there's explicit data. There's declared data. There's survey data, what someone is actually telling you through a conversation. And what's really interesting about where we are in the data landscapes today is a couple of convergent trends. For 10 years now, we've all known that the march towards third party, towards first party was going to happen. We'll talk about where third-party data can still be useful and there's still value there. But largely, there's little debate in the conversations I'm having that we need to invest more in first-party data solutions. The question is, now what? And for what purpose? A lot of people are struggling with even leveraging the first-party data that they have, putting it to good use. A lot of the first-party data out there is not actionable. It's not relevant to the conversation we just had. This idea that in a time when we have a crisis of trust, when we are consistently challenged to capture consumers' attention, what is going to be the most relevant data that we can use to create a consumer-first experience that is more contextually relevant? Not just based on, in that moment, what channel they are and because they happen to be at an airport in X location, but what are their hopes? What are their dreams? What are their motivations, right? Are they buying that shoe as a gift and they don't want to be followed around for 15 days afterwards? Or were they just browsing? Was it an accidental click? All of these things come into question. So when we think about data, we think about it, sure, there's the GDPR and CCPA angle, and regulation will be a forcing function for all of us to be more aware of permission-based advertising and making sure that consumers are part of that consent equation. But this is just better business. It's just better business to better understand our customer, have more context, and be able to relay that in more relationship and CRM-based marketing campaigns. So at least that's our opinion.
So Martin, I know you've looking at some of the holding company acquisitions of data companies, you've had a definite point of view on some of those. And, Publicis has had one recently, IPG, and then I think you've been...
You want me to grade them?
No, I've seen you grade them. And you gave Merkle at Dentsu
I gave Merkle an A.
Yeah.
I gave Axiom a B, and I gave Epsilon a C.
Okay. And why...
That A being a good grade and C being a bad grade. Just so we get that clear. And then you've got WPP going in totally the opposite direction, which is getting rid of the data assets, which, And they have some first-party data assets. I mean, Christian Jewell, who's really excellent, one of the best managers I've ever come across in terms of agencies. But since he took over Group M, I don't think he quite understands what he's got. You've got inside Xaxis, and you've got inside KBM, which is part of Wonderman, very significant first-party data assets. And he said he can rent the assets, which is a sort of attitude that John Renner has at Omnicom. And right or wrong, I'm not saying owning is necessarily better than renting, but you've got to understand what you've got. And WPP actually had, through Kantar and elsewhere, very strong first-party data assets. I put Kantar World Panel in that and the Kantar media assets. So if you look at them, they're all going in, well, they're not all. 3 of them are going in one direction, one's going in the other direction. My own view is that first-party data is really important. The problem that we have, we're a small company. We've gone from 0 to $600 million of market cap in a year. We'll see where we go in the second year. But it really is more difficult for us. These assets are priced highly. They're often early stage assets, Series B, Series C, VC assets. So they tend to have maybe revenue. Well, some of them don't have revenue, but some have revenue and revenue growth, but they don't have EBITDA margin yet, and are not prepared at this early stage in their development to focus on that. It's quite difficult. So one of the things we're doing, and Emily Del Greco is here also, who runs Mighty Hive in the Americas. And one of the things we're doing is concentrating on data analytics as well. So you'll see Mighty Hive build its data analytics capability, which in a sense is part of the the first-party data assets to build. But if I could find, and there are 1 or 2 things about, they're very highly priced. If I could find very good first-party data asset, I would do it. The other thing to say is this: a lot of clients, say particularly in the financial services area, have massive first-party data assets, which because the companies have grown by acquisition, or because you've had internal technology departments or CTOs or CIOs who've had different systems, the systems don't talk to one another. And their ability to exploit, if that's the right word, the first-party data assets is extremely limited because the cost of doing so, they have to take massive write-offs to redevelop and re-platform them. So there is a lot of data there, but often it doesn't get used. And part of the problem also is that these companies focus on the short term. Somebody said something about the long term. Controlled companies and private companies, private family companies, so a company like Mars or Chanel, can take a much longer view in terms of the trouble with being an uncontrolled listed company is average life of a CEO is 5 years, 6 years. So they tend to take a short-term view, and that's I think the real problem. Coming back to what Lou's over-intellectualizing piece was, where I do agree with him is that people just don't take the long-term view, and that's the real cancer that affects companies.
Just one thought on that. And I think you have to ask yourself at this point in the conversation, do you have a marketing-led data strategy on paper in your company? And if not, what is your data strategy and who set it for you? And how is it serving marketing? And I think when you do that, to bring it more to an advertising layer, a lot of things happen. You can go to your tech partners and say, we need a single view of the customer across all touch points in one Hadoop environment, or one environment that we can leverage to orchestrate experiences in paid known environments. 2, you can start to set policy about things like personal privacy. What is our standard of care with privacy? How are we going to action this data? Are we going to use some rules-based approach? Or are we going to use real decision science to understand mindset, motivation, need state more deeply? Right? What is our covenant with users? How are we going to ensure that they feel good about the permissions that they have with us? And we're working with people in this room about some really tasty permission experiments where maybe the platform shouldn't be the one getting the permission. Maybe we should just get it directly and stop relying on third parties when we're in a trust-based relationship with 67 million customers. But it starts with marketers setting a marketing data strategy and then bumping it up against the enterprise data strategy and saying, okay, you missed these areas. Can you help us get there? And don't expect what you don't inspect. I would put it that way. And if you don't have a marketing-led data strategy, you might have an outage.
And just to build on that with an earlier point of yours, I can't underscore enough that marketing does not equal advertising.
Yeah.
There's 3 other P's. So
You get applause for everything you say.
I'll take it.
She's
Thank you,
popular.
everyone. Thank you.
Did you want to add something, Ben?
No, I mean, from my perspective and NYIAX's perspective, we're excited about the day where people actually have not only ownership of their data, but to the point like where they're controlling not only the permissions of the use of their data, but also what they're getting in return for. Your clients are your clients. You're giving an exchange of value for that. That's one example. But for a publisher, what's the exchange? What's that? What's the intermediary platform where their data is being absorbed and utilized? What's the value to the end user in that, and how does that play back to either return?
More relevant ads ain't
Yeah.
it. That ain't it. Right?
No, exactly.
We've got to raise the bar on what that covenant is.
Yeah.
Just want to come back on this fragmentation point. What we see is, I mean, just come back to financial services businesses. I think of banks where CMOs thought they were controlling the marketing function, but the CTO or the CIO has, banks are spending $10, $11 billion a year, at least, on IT functions. A lot of that expenditure affects the customer. A lot of it is internal, a lot of it is enterprise to the bank, but it affects the customer, and the CMO doesn't have control over that. So you have the sort of split of the marketing function to the CTO or the CIO. You have the CMO, and then there's a third feature. The industry, we're 500 billion in media, we're 500 billion in marketing services, and about 700 billion, which the dominant part is sales budgets, which is the stuff that Amazon goes after. So the whole industry is about 1.7 trillion. And it's the CSO, the sales function, that is also split. So we've got a very fragmented, marketing in the new age, new era, as we would put it, is split between 3 areas: the CIO, CTO, the CMO, and the sales organization. So that fragmentation, used to be the only thing you saw, you might see public relations going up through the general counsel or something, and that was the split. It's much more complex now and much more fragmented.
Well, who's doing that in a good, we're seeing major marketers start to combine some of these things.
The tech companies understand this most.
Okay. Do you see any sort of big brand marketers? Do any of you have any examples of just rejiggering that CMO role to encompass some
I
of
can't
these?
think of one that has consolidated, maybe it's not the right thing to do, has consolidated those 3 things into one. I know a lot of CMOs who are frustrated they don't have control over the sales function because of the, Amazon, which at the moment is probably about 12 billion of ad revenues. Google last year was at 125, and Facebook was around 52, so it gives you orders of magnitude. My view is that Amazon will get to 100. But remember that 60% of all that revenue is long tail, because where Amazon are focused is the long tail. It's the small business and medium-sized business enterprises that they're going after. But they're focused on that sales function, and I know CMOs are very frustrated about it. I know CMOs who are frustrated that they don't have control or influence or a voice on the CIO, CTO piece of it. But I can't think of anybody who's brought them together as one. And I think that's where we're going to see a little bit of development, because I think the more sophisticated ones will start to think about it that way.
Do you see it as a communications issue, or do you see it as a misalignment
So it's an organization issue. I mean, as we define the CMO, as we think of the CMO as a marketing organization, we see the interrelationship between those 3 areas. I'm not sure that inside organizations, the CEOs or the CMOs or the CIOs or the CTOs or whatever are prepared to make the change. But they are becoming much more correlated and much more integrated. Particularly, I think, the sales organization and the marketing organization. That has to come together, because Amazon, which is such a force, when Amazon launches, the wake-up call is, I'm trying to remember the name of the shoe that Amazon copied, private label.
Allbirds.
Right, that's one. Then Lady Gaga, we were doing a road show in America, and then in the midst of the road show, Lady Gaga, they launched the Lady Gaga cosmetics. That's an amazing wake-up call to any of the branded cosmetics companies.
Okay. Anything to add down there? You guys are so far.
I think titles aside, there's one convergence here, and at the end of the day, customers don't care if they're dealing with the marketing function, the sales function, the customer support function. It's one experience. And so we are seeing companies start to try and build organizations around, call it a chief experience officer or a chief customer officer, right? Like, again, each company is going to approach it differently, but I am seeing some, if we're having the structure conversation, some interesting innovation around reorganizing the talent to better bring together marketers that are focused on life cycle, relationship, loyalty, kind of every touch point about the experience component of it, and product is certainly a part of that, but also marrying it with the data from not only an asset standpoint, but also a skill set standpoint.
Okay. I think probably most of you read a study, I think it was in the journal a few months ago, it was talking about sort of is there a true benefit to having, behavioral advertising from a monetary perspective versus contextual advertising? I thought that was interesting, and it found that this study found it was only sort of slightly more beneficial from a revenue perspective.
Yeah.
Curious if you buy that.
Revenue is one way to look at it because you have to look at it over time. I think, again, I think we have to fundamentally change the talk track in advertising, and over-intellectualizing aside, I think we're in a relationship. Yeah, clearly. Well, yeah. I feel like I'm getting my homework graded on stage. But we are in an era where relationships over the long run between brands and consumers are more important to the capitalization of that company, I think, than short-term sales. Now, the street would maybe disagree with that. But what we've proven at Bank of America, and the person who did the work is sitting in the room, is that favorability matters more, because favorability is predictive of profitability over time. And if I look at every interaction as an opportunity to be relevant or not, if I look at every interaction as an opportunity to deliver something of real value, not something that, as Rob Norman would say if he were here, the forced viewing economy is over. People will not endure our crap anymore, right? So we've got to engineer utility in every interaction, utility of some form, whether it's entertainment value as a marketer, whether it's a calculator to help people understand what their house is worth, whether it's an unimagined experience. When we do that over time, the model that we built, and it was pretty rigorous work, says overwhelmingly people who like you better do much more business with you, and you can come back to that. Now, I'm in a business where we have products, 8 different lines of business that are relevant throughout your life, so it's a little bit easier for us to be patient for the next thing than others. But I don't think there's a single business, even CPG, which is sold through an intermediary, where you're not in a relationship, and the brand is nothing short of the handle, like the name of somebody, and people take stock of that, whether it's subliminally or overtly, and say, yes, that is a brand for me, and whatever they have, I'm going to pay attention to.
Let's throw a rock in the pool on that just for a minute. So I don't disagree with it. I agree with what you say, but
Is that an A or a B?
Thinking about you get an A. Long term, just to be controversial, McKinsey's study was recently on the S&P 500 and FTSE 100 was that the average firm lasts for 17 years. And it may be, I do believe in long-term branding and building brands for the long term, but it may be that the nature of technology and the nature of technological change means that companies' life cycles are going to be very compressed. And, Thomas Cook is a bad example. He was around for 168 years or whatever it was.
Why are you conflating brands and companies?
Well, no. Okay. Life cycles, right? I mean, they can be brand cycles, they can be company cycles. It may be that company cycles are compressed because of technological change. So I think it may have changed, and I think that we've got to acknowledge that.
What I think is, go ahead. I was just going to say, I think what's clear is that that is more important now than ever before. And I think because of, and when we talk about the D2C model, if companies, especially legacy companies, aren't able to continue to innovate on this value-based exchange where you're putting out content or you're putting out entertainment or whatever it is, and the goal of that has to be to better understand your customer to provide more value at the next touch point. If we aren't in that value exchange loop where each touch point continues to progressively understand more about them and the marketing material itself is a product of value outside of the product itself, that's when I think companies become at risk, and that's where...
To compete against the platforms and or to compete against the e-tailers, Amazon, Tencent, Alibaba being the chief ones, you have to develop direct-to-consumer relationships. So in 2016, when the platform suddenly said the walls in the walled gardens are going to get higher, what did the clients do? They started to buy. Unilever bought Dollar Shave Club.
Yeah.
And Nestle buys Starbucks, which Media Monks worked on, launched. Coca-Cola buys Costa. So there's a twin strategy. There's a bricks and clicks strategy. It's counterintuitive. The bricks bit is let's control distribution. So Christian Dior in China has 200 stores, perfume stores, where they're trying to build, and they're getting first-party data from that, by the way, and they build Dior.com. So there's a bricks and clicks strategy which they're trying to employ to compete against the platforms. And Amazon, your margin, my opportunity. That's the tagline for Jeff Bezos, right? And his anti-regulation philosophy is, what are we going to do at Amazon in the next 5 years? We're going to continue to provide goods and services to consumers at lower prices. How does the regulator defeat that? That's a tough one.
Yeah.
But I think there's an opportunity now, though, that we haven't had before for the conversations to be had between the brand and the consumer directly. And the technology platforms currently, if they're working on behalf of the brands or with the brands, whether they're direct to consumer or through a brick and mortar or other methodology, have the ability to work with the brand to help guide that consumer story and be able to pull that information together and be able to understand what not only the consumer's journey is, but also what their intent and interest is, and be able to gauge that and pull that in, which can then be used by the brand to help spur the next generation and pull that information together.
I think it's both, right? Like I just said right. I hate doing that. My husband would yell at me so loud if he was here, but thankfully he's not. But I tend to think there are categories where, like, you need your shampoo and your toilet paper eye level on the shelf, stocked in, right price. I need enough weight in the market so that I have brand salience and, like, you're gonna give me a consideration when you pass me and put me in the basket. There are other technology-enabled things where it is absolutely unacceptable that Netflix is serving me content that I'm not interested in because you literally know what I do every single night while I'm home alone. So I think there's a spectrum, and I think the conversation that we've been having is like, oh, D2C, that's the new thing. We all have to have first-party data, or actually, Byron Sharp, that's the thing, and we all need to focus on reach and frequency. I think it's both, and it's highly dependent on category, on distribution, on where you are, on the context of the buying situation, the state of retail. I think it's everything, and I don't think that it's behavioral overall.
I want to touch on in-housing really quick and just sort of the closeness and the relationship that marketers have with their consumers. And I think we're seeing, it's interesting, I had a couple of panels at a conference recently, and one panel completely was brands that have in-housed most of their marketing operations, and then another one with solely agency executives. And agency executives say, well, they really need us, and the brands were saying, we really actually don't. So it was fascinating to hear, and I really do think it depends on what kinds of marketing a brand is doing. But where do you guys see that going? Is that going to go out back the other way, or is this going to continue as a trend?
65%, according to Mighty Hive, 65% of clients are in housing functions. The other 35% are thinking about it. So our view, and we don't have the incumbency disease, and the agencies, apart from being paranoid about anybody talking to their clients, are also paranoid about losing the business, keeping clients happy. And at WPP, everybody would say the client is happy. That was it doesn't necessarily have to be true that the client is happy. You can deliver value and the client be unhappy. That's the key thing. And I think in-housing comes back to this take back control. The pitches that we see at the moment, there are 5 major global pitches going on at the moment in media and content, or one or the other. All of them are what I would call considered. They're not throwing mud against the wall and seeing how much sticks, which in the media paloozas or the tsunamis that we saw a few years ago. What's happening now is that CMOs, I think, feel more confident. They are still concerned about their structures and confused about their structures, but they feel more confident, and they're turning the dial up now. And what we're seeing is a much more considered, I would say they're considered reviews, where they're even saying, we don't want to have anything to do with traditional, so we're focused just on the digital piece, where they're actually saying to us, here's the brief, you decide whether you can do the digital piece of this or not, and we'll sort of think about how we consolidate and coordinate that. They'll take over that function because they're absorbing a lot of the functions. So I think in-housing is a trend which, what you said, clearly points out that people talk in their self-interest. We don't have a self-interest in terms of incumbency, so we're totally agnostic about it. And the spectrum is in-housing, co-location, outsourcing. Those are the three models.
I think the in-housing conversation for clients begins with, what do you want to be good at, right? What are the things that are part of your destiny as an entity? So for us, we want to be really good at the data. We want to be really good at dynamic creative. We want to be really good at search, because that's all real-time signals of intent that we want to be able to leverage. And then you can start to build around that. But in-housing as a construct is like we just discovered radio waves. We had a 100-person in-house agency 10 years ago that produces collateral for banking centers and a lot of other things. And so we're just shift mixing from that, which may be a more commoditized business now, which might be better served by an agency where economies of scale still linger, and maybe moving dynamic-driven creative, data-driven creative into that shop. And my colleague who runs that business is so excited about that. And we're now actually saying, we can do this, we can do it in real time, we can leverage our own first-party data. We're much more comfortable if our first-party data is being used to drive creative that's being driven by employees who sign the exact same privacy policy that I do, right? So it's a matter of what do you want to own versus what do you want to rent. I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I don't think every client is going to think about moving.
What's driven it, Lou, is you said it yourself just now, real time. In 24/7 real time, you have to have it on premise. So there are downsides. What do I do about keeping up with tech? Do I want to work for the rest of my life on Bank of America programmatic or content or whatever it happens to be?
Yes, of course.
Maybe what I want to do is something else, right?
Yeah.
So
Tech
it's
and talent are
keeping
two big
people,
problems.
it's talent and tech, and that's the after-sales service, if you like, that the in-houser can. But what drove it, or what has driven it, has been this 24/7 real time. I liken it to an electoral campaign. I really think it is like that. Because it's an iterative process. It's personalization at scale. It's an iterative process. It's totally different to what's happened. That's what I think.
We should hire Brad Parscale. We should hire Brad Parscale. They're in that.
So to interject again,
Depending on the right results of the election, you may have to.
Yeah, let's just pivot. I think for me, the important thing to remember within housing is it's not the last decision we're ever going to make. I mean, pending what happens with Brexit. But when I think of in-housing, I think of this old Coca-Cola case study where essentially they were like, God, we buy so much damn movie advertising, let's buy a movie studio. Wouldn't that be so great? And then we could have all this free movie advertising. And that worked for 3 years. And then it was we make soda, why the fuck do we own a movie studio? So I think there's a little bit of that going on within housing, and some of it's hey, we don't need an agency. When we were setting up in housing, I was meeting with people who were like, we buy our own TV. What the hell are agencies good for? Screw that. And then, it's fun to have breakfast with those people now, and they're like, oh no, we're pretty much agency led. That was a fun experiment. When I went to the ANA in-house summit, I think it was this year, maybe last year, but people were lamenting about the woes of I came in from an agency and I was a star and I created this in-house agency and we had a brand and we had our own pens, and then people didn't give us the right briefs, and how can we work in these conditions? And I only, got to work on whatever, as Sir Martin was saying, this one thing. So I think we're going through, an in-housing curious moment where we're all experimenting with some things. And what we want to keep, as Lou said, I imagine that will be different for most of us, and it will be what's business critical versus not. I would be really surprised to find that the majority of brands also want to get into the ad agency business and really commit to that path long term.
Getting into the ad agency businesses, right? It's you have assets at your disposal, at your fingertips, which are changing. You know, again, Lou used the phrase, words real time. It is different. This is a different atmosphere. This is a different environment. You know, Lou said, well, you know, years ago we used to have an in-house agency. This is different this time. Fundamentally different. The technological change means it's fundamental. The definition of creativity is fundamentally different to the way you defined it. Certainly when I was in the business, shows you how old I am, 40 years ago. It's the inability of the industry to understand that fundamental change that is critical. We all look with rose-tinted glasses at Don Draper. Forget it, it's gone. You know, we talk about crises. You know, the first part of this conversation was about the threats. There are opportunities there, for Christ's sake. There's a part of the industry that is growing at 20%. Focus on it. And it's a big shift. And we still insist, you know, the number of creatives that say, you know, that suggest that the people in the technological part of the industry lack creativity or don't have creativity. Define creativity much more broadly. It's change, for Christ's sake.
Well, I think you've got I think there's a difference also between taking something in-house entirely and leaving it with the agency completely. There's value to the agency in certain aspects where you've got economy of scale. That's the big benefit in a lot of pieces. But you can get that through other pieces as well, where you can, through an a la carte model, you can have an outside agency that's dealing with just the creative aspect, that does it for a bunch of small related fields or brands that are similar, and has the expertise and the willingness to do certain aspects of it. Other groups may do things related to the finance aspects. There's different pieces that can be adapted without having to take something entirely in-house. I mean, if we go through these pendulum moments. We did it with mobile. Everybody went, hey, let's do our mobile strategy in-house. And then they pushed that back to the agency. It's opportunity in terms of what the technology may breed, where something may come along from the idea of let's take this in-house, but you know what, there's an outside company that may specialize in it that everybody can utilize that gains the advantages in the economy of scale while still providing the unique services for each individual company.
I think we're out of time. Wow.
All right.
Thank you guys
There
so
we
much.
have it.
This was fun.
Thanks very much.